Here are 4 retirement spending strategies you can't afford to ignore. My name is Daniel, founder of McCluskey Financial, and the first, which is very foundational for the rest, which attempts to build off of it, is the simple 4% rule. This means if you have $1 million in the market, let's say you retire at age 65, you are able to take $40,000 a year and adjust that for inflation over time. If you continue to do that, you will likely be comfortable over a 30-year time horizon. Now, of course, that's not guaranteed, but it's really as simple as that. If you had that $40,000 withdrawal in year 1 and inflation was 3%, next year you get 3% more than 40,000 or 41.2. If the next year inflation is 2%, you inflate that by 2%, you get $42,024. Does not matter what happens in the market. All you are doing with this strategy is increasing that number with inflation. If you are going to implement this strategy directly, which very many do not, just going to be best for someone seeking max simplicity and predictability for income. It's ignoring actual market performance, and not many actually use this strategy verbatim. Second is the retirement spending smile, and this addresses the problem that the 4% rule doesn't. And that is that people do not tend to spend the exact same amounts across their entire retirement adjusting for inflation. People go through different stages in life and have different expenses. Now, a great body of research has shown that if you are accounting for inflation, instead of your expenses just being a long, flat line and steady throughout retirement, instead it looks a little bit like a smile. In those early years, you're spending more money, you're traveling, those are your go-go years. Slowly, as you get farther into retirement, you have your slow-go years, you're doing less traveling, maybe less out to eat, and then as you get later into retirement, those are your no-go years where higher spending again, of course, because of healthcare. So to implement this strategy verbatim, all you're doing is picking an initial withdrawal amount. Let's just say we chose $40,000 there, and then adjusting a little bit lower than what inflation actually is, instead of taking the full inflationary adjustment in those early years. So in year 1, if inflation was 3%, maybe you only increase by 2%. In year 15, which is around the middle of your retirement, if inflation was 3%, well then you take the full 3%. In year 25, much later in your retirement, if inflation was 3%, maybe you're taking 4%. That's how we go from the 80,000 to the 83.2. Again, this does not account at all for what's happening in the market. It's not making changes based off if the market goes up or down. The third strategy is the guardrails approach. And this, along with the next two, are really trying to get at what the previous two didn't. And that is that when the market goes up 100% over the first 2 years of retirement, retirees say, well, instead of just leaving behind way more money, I would like to actually increase my spending. Same thing if the market goes down 50% in the first 2 years. Retirees say, I don't just want to ignore that and continue adjusting my spending for inflation, hoping and praying the market's going to come back. I would like to adjust to make sure I have more money later on. So here's a bit of a modified example to keep it simple of how the guardrails approach works. So you establish that initial withdrawal rate, say it's between 4 and 5%. We're going to choose 5% in this example. You have an upper guardrail and a lower guardrail in terms of withdrawal rate alone. So we chose 5%, so it's going to be 20% higher, which is 6%. The lower guardrail, 20% lower, which is 4%. If the withdrawal rate goes above or below those guardrails, you will respectively increase or decrease your spending by 10%. So here's a simple example. In year 1, we have $1 million. We chose our withdrawal rate here as 50,000, so we're going to take 50,000. Now, after year 1, we have the growth as 10%. That means we had $1 million, subtract 50,000, there's 950,000. That grew by 10% to give us the 1,045,000. So inflation was 3%. So that is how we get our projected amount here. We increased the 50,000 by 3% to get 51.5. Now what we'll do is we will divide 51.5 thousand into the account balance and see what the projected withdrawal rate is. 4.93 is what we got. Is that between 4 and 6? Yes, it is. So you get your projected amount, the 51.5. Do the same thing again next year. After we account for the growth, we're left with 1.19 million. 3% inflation, so we're going to increase the projected amount by that 3%, giving us the 5304. We divide that into the account balance, That gives us our projected withdrawal rate. 4.45, is that between 4 and 6? Yes, it is, so we get that amount, $53,045. After we account for the growth next year, we have a little over 1.4 million, 3% inflation, so here is our projected amount, the 54.6 thousand. We divide that into the account balance. We see the projected withdrawal rate is 3.84%. Is that between 4 and 6%? Nope, it's actually below the lower guardrail. Therefore, we get a 10% pay increase. So we end up with 60.1 thousand. We then add in our growth, which is actually a loss for the next year of minus 30%. We have that 954.691 thousand. Inflation is 3%, but we actually don't decrease it with this specific approach when the market goes down. So our projected amount is the 60.1 there. Projected withdrawal rate 6.3. Is it in between the 6 and 4? No, it is not. It's actually above the upper guardrail. So we take a 10% pay cut. That's how we got the 54,000. The fourth strategy is the floor and ceiling strategy, which is similar to the guardrails, but sets those limits differently. And I'll show very clearly at the end which one actually may be best for each individual person. So with the floor and ceiling method, you're setting that initial withdrawal rate again, usually again between 4 and 5%, and then establishing a floor and ceiling in dollar amounts, not in terms of withdrawal rates, 25% above that initial withdrawal amount and 10% below. So here's how this one works. In year one, again, we have that $1 million there. We chose the 5% projected rate. 25% above 50,000 is this ceiling here. 45,000 is 10% below the projected 50,000 here. And because it's just the first year, we take our 5%, that's the 50,000. Now the growth was 10%, so we factor that in, we're left with 1,045,000. Inflation was 3%, so this is how we get the ceiling and the floor. We increase both of them by 3%. Our projected withdrawal rate was 5%, so we take 5% of 1,045,000. That's the 52,250. We then see, is this number between the floor number and the ceiling number? 52,000 is, so that's the amount we get, 52.250. That ended up being our actual withdrawal rate. The growth was 20%, so that grows us to 1.19 million. Inflation was 3%, so we inflate both the ceiling and the floor by 3%. Our projected withdrawal rate again was 5%, so we take 5% of the 1.19 million. That gives us 59.5 thousand. Is 59.5 thousand in between the floor and the ceiling? In this case, yes it is, so we get that actual 5. That's the amount we get. The growth was 25%, so we add that in afterwards. We're left with 1.41 million. Inflation was 3%, so we increase again the ceiling and the floor by 3%. Projected withdrawal rate 5%, so we take that from the 1.41 million. We're left with 70.7 thousand. Is 70.7 thousand in between the floor and the ceiling? No, it is not. It's actually above the ceiling. So in this case, we just get the ceiling of the 68.295 thousand. That makes our actual withdrawal rate 4.83%. Next year, we lost 30%. We make that adjustment there. It's 942,000. Inflation is 3%. So again, we adjust the ceiling and the floor by those very numbers, 3%. We see that the projected withdrawal rate is still 5%. So we take 5% of the account balance. We're left with a projected amount of 47.1 thousand. Is that between the ceiling and the floor? No, it is not. It's below the floor. So we get the floor. 50.648 thousand. Hey, real quick, if you're finding this video helpful, leave a like and let me know. And finally, a bonus strategy, we have the Vanguard dynamic spending strategy. Again, pretty similar to the guardrails and the floor and ceiling, where we're going to pick that initial withdrawal amount between 4 and 5% generally, and then we're establishing a floor and ceiling with a percentage above and below what we withdrew last year. So in this case, the ceiling is going to be 5% above the inflation adjusted withdrawal from last year, the floor 2.5% below. So in year one, we have the $1 million. We're still using that 5% projected withdrawal rate. We got our ceiling withdrawal 5% above it, floor withdrawal 2.5% below. Of course, it's the first year, so we're going to take that 50,000. The growth was minus 4%. So after we factor that in, we are left with 912,000. Of course, that's after the $50,000 withdrawal. Inflation was 2%. So what we are doing is we are taking 50,000, inflating it by 2%, then going 5% above that to get the ceiling, and 2.5% below that to get the floor. We see with the new amount here, if our projected withdrawal rate is 5% and we take that, is 45.6 thousand. Is that between our ceiling and our floor? No, it is not, so we take the floor. We get that 49.7 thousand. That makes our actual withdrawal rate 5.45%. Then the market grew by 10%. That got us up to 942.46 thousand. Inflation was 2%, so we inflated the 49,725 by 2%, then increased it by 5% to get the ceiling, decreased it by 2.5% to get the floor. Projected amount, 5% of the 942 is 47.1 thousand. Is that between the floor and the ceiling? No, it is not. It's below the floor. So again, we get the floor, 49,452. Of course, that actual withdrawal rate is 5.25. Next year, the growth was 25%. That brings us back up to 1.1 million. We adjust the 49.4 thousand from last year's withdrawal by 2%, increase it by 5% to get the ceiling, decrease it by 2.5% to get the floor. We take 5% of the account balance. That gives us 55.8 thousand. Is that between the floor and the ceiling? No, it is not. It's above the ceiling. So that means we get the ceiling. 52.9 thousand. Withdrawal rate goes down to 4.74. So bringing it all together, a little comparison, the 4% rule is going to be much simpler and for more predictable income, not really having to go in and manage things. The retirement spending smile, however, is going to be more in line with actual human spending patterns. Both of these, however, aren't generally used on their own, but instead are building the foundation for the three strategies we went over. The guardrails, the floor and ceiling, and the dynamic spending, all of these adjusting withdrawal rates and withdrawal amounts when the markets go up and down and not just completely ignoring that. Now, first and foremost, the dynamic spending here, I'll start with on the left. The adjustments it are making are much smaller, much careful, only 5% above or 2.5% below. They're much closer to the 4% rule because they're still being careful. They don't want to make big jumps or big losses even when the market makes big changes. Now, a downside to this could be if we have some really awesome market years, but you're capped at only a 5% increase, you're not participating in that full upside. Same thing, if the market goes way down and you're only dropping by 2.5%, but you should be more, you might not have that money last as long as if you were adjusting more. The second here, which I'll skip to, is the first one, guardrails. That's maximum pay raise / cuts of 10%. So similar there, but that max raise and cut is going to be bigger, so we can participate more in the upside wins, but we also have to cut back more in the downturns. And finally, the floor and ceiling, just like that example we showed, steadier when inflation is normal, market gains are average, but when things get good, pay raises can be really good. However, as we showed in that example, when things start to get bad, pay cuts can be pretty nasty as well. So the three of them, unlike the 4% rule and the spending smile, all adjust spending depending on performance. Which one of these is best for you? Of course, it's always going to depend on your holistic picture. None of these strategies actually lasting for 30 years, 40 years, or even longer are of course by any means guaranteed, but picking the right one can be the difference between you retiring 2 years earlier, between your money lasting 3, 4, 5 years longer, between you being able to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars more throughout retirement. You're within 10 years of retirement in the US. There's so many different things you could focus on. You just don't know what to zero in on. Subscribe. I release videos for you twice a week on how to do that peacefully. Bye-bye.